Good evening. Welcome to the broadcast. I'm Bill Watt, originally from Duluth, Minnesota, and for the last 50 years, I've been living in Port Huron, Michigan. I played hockey at Michigan State from 1966 to 1970, and I played for the Port Huron Flags of the IHL from 1972 to 1977. How do I introduce Mike Emrick? Mike Emrick, to me, is a legend in sports broadcasting. Over 3,700 NHL games, 22 Stanley Cups, Olympics, and the list goes on and on. 48 years ago, when I was playing for the Port Huron Flags in 1973, Mike came to do the play-by-play. Over the years, we became very good friends, and to this day, we keep in touch. When I retired, I had the opportunity to work with Mike on the radio. And then that was in Port Huron on the radio. And then that was my first sign that I knew Mike was going to be going places, and Port Huron wouldn't be the first on his stop. His professionalism, his incredible memory and detail gives the listeners what they want to hear. His knowledge of the game is uncanny for someone who has never played the game. His accomplishments will attest to that. He has an NHL Lester Patrick Award for media work, Foster Hewitt Award, 9 Emmy Awards. No other sportcaster has won. Sports Illustrated Sportcaster of the Year, United States Hockey Hall of Fame, and of course, Port Huron Sports Hall of Fame in 1997. I did not know Mike was writing a book, which I would highly recommend. In the book, there's all kinds of experiences Mike has gone through with famous people, not so famous people, serious people, not so serious people, humorous. His expertise in broadcasting carries over into his writing. If you haven't read the book off Mike, I suggest that you pick one up. It's very entertaining, and it will give you some insight into the wild and wacky world of hockey. Also tonight, we have a co-author with us, Kevin Allen. Kevin also started in Port Huron in 1982 with the Times Herald. He's an American sports journalist. He's worked 34 years with the United States Hockey. He also has the Lester Patrick Award for Outstanding Service to USA Hockey, the Elmer Ferguson Award for Hockey Journalism. He's wrote several books with the likes of Stu Grimson, Chris Chelios, Brett Hall, Darren McCarthy, among others. So with that said, enjoy the broadcast, enjoy this book, and here's Mike Doc Emrick and Kevin Allen.
Thank you, Bill, for that great introduction. We appreciate that. And as Bill said, we've got Mike ready to go here. And, I'm going to serve as kind of the host here and tee up Mike for some of the great stories that are in the book. And, Bill brought up about his time in Port Huron, which I loved being part of the writing for, because that's just such an entertaining time, and I knew a little bit about it. But we're going to go back even further to start this, because I think one of the most unique aspects of Mike Emrick is that he grew up in basketball crazy Indiana to become the greatest American hockey broadcaster. And Mike, you got to talk a little bit about how that came to be, how a kid who grew up loving the Pittsburgh Pirates and baseball and, was so involved in a basketball state, suddenly found that the game he truly loved was hockey.
I'm not sure how many people on this call have seen the movie Hoosiers, but if you have, and you've seen that panoramic view of the countryside and the flatland and the silos and the farms, that was my time. And that was my size of a town. Our population in the 1950 census was 627. There were 13 celebrities in our town, the coach of the varsity team and the 12 players that made the team. Unlike Norman Dale, who was the mythical coach of Hickory, our coach got fired in the middle of the year. And the students, the upperclassmen, I was in 5th grade, we weren't allowed to walk out, but the upperclassmen walked out. They made the Indianapolis News 90 miles away that night. 3 days later, the coach was rehired. That was small town Indiana. It was all about basketball. But in 1960, I was 14 years of age, and we had an Olympic team that perhaps is easily forgotten about, a men's hockey team that won the gold medal at a place called Squaw Valley. Parenthetically, they are trying to change the name of that town because the name is viewed as pejorative now. So the city council is trying to get it changed, and by next year, perhaps it will have another name, but that was what it was called back then, where the Olympics were held, and the US men, a bunch of amateurs who were paid $1 a day expenses and took time off work, won. I saw those games on CBS television, and CBS started carrying NHL games. We had a team in Fort Wayne, Indiana that wore these jerseys, these orange and black things with spacemen, because in the 50s and early 60s, spacemen were unique. And finally, I had cajoled my parents into taking my brother and me to a live game in Fort Wayne, over an hour away from where we lived. Up until that time, I'd wanted to be a baseball announcer. And when I saw hockey live that night, I had an epiphany moment. I wanted to be a hockey announcer. You can imagine what my guidance counselor in high school said when I told him that was what I wanted to do. But I wanted to be a hockey announcer. And the question was, well, how do you do that? And one of the ways was to go to Fort Wayne on Wednesday nights when they didn't sell out and sit in a corner section with a tape recorder and record games to myself and just practice. And then as the years went on, send those tapes and hope that somebody eventually would hire me. It took 13 years, but eventually I did get hired to be a teammate of Bill Watts, though one in the booth in Port Huron, Michigan, for a negotiated salary of $160 a week. I negotiated it. I don't know what I was thinking. But it was the most money I ever had in my life up to that point. And was I ever happy? Because I'd finally achieved my goal from age 14, even though it took me till I was 27 to do it.
Mike, you've had a lot of memorable games in the NHL you called, but I know at least one of the more memorable games that you broadcast. One was the fight in Port Huron that spilled into the lobby in front of the ticket booth with the accounting still going on during the game. And of course, you're probably one of the few broadcasters who actually called a wedding live as a broadcaster. Can you talk about both of those?
Yeah, first in Port Huron, the arrangement was the benches were on either side of the ice. And of course, the advantage with the home team was to have the penalty boxes next to them, because if both teams had to serve penalties, you had an 85-foot advantage by having the penalty box next to you. The other team had to go all the way across the ice to change players out of a penalty. So Fort Wayne was playing in Port Huron one Sunday afternoon, and one of the Fort Wayne players was getting a minor penalty, and he had to skate by the Port Huron bench to go into the penalty box. And he said something to, I don't know if it was Bill Watt or who it was that was sitting at the bench. He said something that was just the magic words. And a couple of the guys followed him onto the ice and into the penalty box. The penalty box in Port Huron was open. It didn't have glass behind it. It was just an open box. Behind it was a marble floor, and behind that was double doors that led out into the lobby where the box office was. Well, as soon as a couple of Port Huron players left the bench to join this the Fort Wayne player in the penalty box, all of the Fort Wayne players came on across. And responding to that, all of the Port Huron players left their bench. At that time, you were allowed to dress 16 and 2. So you had 16 skaters, 2 goaltenders, 18 times 2, 36, all of them milling around into one area. It was a fairly small box. I would estimate 9 feet by 9 feet, maybe 7 by 7. And so not everybody is going to fit. How many college guys can you get into a phone booth? Well, they all spilled over onto the floor, and 2 Fort Wayne players and 2 Port Huron players got locked up and were fighting, and they waltzed through the double doors. The doors closed behind them. And the ticket takers were out there counting the money from the evening and turned around, and they saw these guys scuffling on the marble floor. I don't know if sparks were flying, but from the press box, I had lost sight of 4 of the combatants. Across the street on this Sunday afternoon, there was an ice cream parlor. And at that point, he had the game on the radio, was listening to it. He came across and peered in the glass front doors so he could see what I couldn't see, and that was the fight. There were two main arteries in Port Huron. One was Pine Grove Avenue, and the other one was 7th Street, which led over a bridge, both of those connected to the arena. And he told me the next day that while he was peering through the glass doors at this fight, that there were police cars coming down Pine Grove and across the 7th Street Bridge. And they were coming with sirens going and with flashing lights. They were coming there not to break up the fight. They were listening on the radio, and they were coming there to see all the fun. That was one memorable day, and I don't remember who won the game. I just remember that not everybody that started the game finished it.
And now can you talk about the the wedding that you called? That was the product of the Des Moines IHL team.
They had every team had a booster club, and in Des Moines, we had to go 14 hours by bus on Thursday, play Friday and Saturday, and then to save on the hotel. I think Bill Watt's back is probably hurting by now because there were no beds on this bus. You rode sitting straight up all the way back 14 hours on Sunday to save on the hotel. So you didn't sleep Saturday night in Des Moines. You got on the bus after the game was over and rode all the way back and would get back around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So we made the Thursday trip, the very first trip I'd made to Des Moines in that first season. And the next morning at practice, the Des Moines PR guy came up to me and said, by the way, and by the way is always one of the most dangerous phrases to start a sentence with, isn't it? By the way, the first intermission is going to be about 10 minutes longer tonight because we're going to have a wedding at center ice. The president of the Des Moines Capitals fan club was going to marry one of the members, and this member thought it would be fun to have the wedding on the ice because they were both hockey fans. So they hid the wedding flowers underneath the Des Moines bench, and the coach of the Des Moines team didn't know that until he got angry at a first period call and kicked out with his feet, and the flowers went flying, and he tried to repair them as best he could and stuff them back under the bench. At the end of the period, the Port Huron team left the ice. The Des Moines team was asked to stay out. They unrolled a white mat all the way from the end boards out to center ice. That's about 150 feet, maybe 100 feet to center ice. And then there was another mat that rolled along the center red line about 40 feet. The groom and the minister walked out on the short mat. The bride was to walk out on the long one. She was to process, as it were. The hockey players for Des Moines were to be a part of the service. They were to stand on either side of this long mat and hold their hockey sticks with the blades touching to form an arch. And I'm not sure if you've been around wet hockey equipment, but they had heavily perspired in the first period. And so there was an aroma attached to her march under these hockey sticks. I'm sure she didn't mistake where she was for a church. She got to center ice. The service was rather hastily performed. Kisses were planted and arms were locked, and she and the groom walked back under this arch of hockey sticks. Well, there was a tradition in the Midwest at the time that has been done away with, I understand now, of throwing rice at weddings, and they didn't have any rice to throw, but they sure had a lot of other things. And all of that came over the wire screens onto the ice, and the 10-minute delay, because they had to detach the two nets and push them around like rakes, the 10-minute delay became 45. I was doing the broadcast alone, and that is what's called guts broadcasting. 45 minutes by yourself describing something that is just debris over and over again. Well, they've scooped up most of it now. Maybe the Zamboni can come out. It wasn't the greatest broadcast in the world, but Port Huron won the game. They had normally 1,500 on Friday night. They thought they'd get 1,800. They got about 2,500. So they must have known what they were doing in terms of sales. I appreciate your asking me that, Kevin. It's one of my favorite stories, and it's one of the wildest. I hope the couple is still together because they sure had quite a send-off.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites too. That's why I always ask it whenever we're together. But Mike, a lot of people know you only from the NHL as the national broadcaster for NBC. But obviously, you had tours of duty before then. You were in Maine. You were a Devils broadcaster before that. You were a Flyers broadcaster. Can you give us sort of a little taste of your journey that got you landed you in, as a national broadcaster?
Yes, I was in Port Huron for 4 years, and they each year, because the team was owned by the city, there was a question about whether it would return. Well, Philadelphia had just won 2 Stanley Cups, and about a year later, they became disgusted with their American League arrangement in Springfield and decided they wanted to have control of their players in the American League by creating their own farm team, and thus they would have control. So they put a team in Portland, Maine. They hired Bob McCammon, our coach in Port Huron, as their coach. And there was an open competition for the broadcaster PR guy. And there were 40 candidates. And as it turned out, I was the lucky winner. Philadelphia promotes from within. And after 3 years there, 2 of which were championship years, I got a chance to move on to the NHL in Philadelphia. And that was 40 years ago. I got to spend 3 years there. There was a chance to join Madison Square Garden Network in New York to do the New Jersey Devils games. And I was there for 3 years, and the rights changed, as often happens in television. And so by 1986, with the rights changing, I was offered a 60% pay cut if I wanted to stay on and do the Devils games for the other company. Well, I got the message pretty fast from that and realized that I'd better try and repair and get some things put together. So I wound up doing New York Rangers games on radio part-time and Philadelphia Flyers hosting part-time, rejoined the Flyers 2 years later for 5 years, and then back to the Devils for 18. But in the midst of that, in 1986, I got a chance to do one national game for ESPN. And that was St. Louis at Chicago at the old Chicago Stadium. And from one game, it is only a matter of how things happen after that. Ken Wilson, who was the very astute voice of hockey on ESPN, got better opportunities to do baseball and had to miss a lot of games. And so ESPN just brought me on full time. And so I was able to continue to do games for the Flyers, but also started to do national games. And then that spun off into more national games and regular work for both the Devils and for Fox and later for NBC. I hope that's concise enough. It seemed like it was rambling to me.
No, it was fine, Mike, as always. I want to talk about one game in particular that you did for ESPN. You know what that game is. But before I do, I wanted to remind everyone is even though we all know you as the hockey broadcaster for NBC, that you did Olympics and other sports, and you also did some football. And Hank Schramm was your color analyst, and you have a very funny story about going to, I believe, Lambeau Field and how cold it was, and how Mr. Schramm wanted a particular coat for that game.
Hank liked stuff. He liked gear, and CBS had a lot of gear. They had blazers that you could wear, but usually in football season, we didn't wear those because the weather wasn't good enough much of the season to do it. But we were scheduled to do a game the last Sunday in November at Lambeau Field. So, you know, it's going to be cold, right? And it's with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And so on Monday, the week of the game on Sunday afternoon, I get a phone call from Hank. And he always began his conversations. Now, Hank was 2 inches shorter than I, and I'm 5'7". And he would always start, "Mike, you little rat." That's how he would begin. "Mike, you little rat, we need something." I said, "What's that, Hank?" He said, "The CBS has those parkas. It's going to be cold at Lambeau Field. We got to get those parkas. So you call them and I'll call them. And we'll get those parkas. They got the CBS football on them. They got the logo on them, and they're worth about $200. So we got to get those." So anyway, I made the call, and they understood that Green Bay was going to be cold. Now, 7-day forecasts were not as accurate as they are today. But we arrived there on Friday. You interview the home team on Friday, the visitors on Saturday, and Sunday afternoon you do the game. So we arrived on Friday and no parkas. And of course, Hank buttonholes everybody on the crew saying, we got to have those parkas. Aren't we going to look foolish shivering in our overcoats on camera for our open on Sunday? We got to have the parkas. So anyway, they overnight the parkas to us. They arrive on Sunday morning, and we get a chance to have the parkas. And it was 55 degrees and sunny in Green Bay on that sunny Sunday in November. And neither of us wore our parkas, but I still have mine. And I'm sure Hank took his home in the same plastic I did. It never came out of the wrapper, but he got a parka out of it, and he was a very happy man.
Yeah, and just one more trip down memory lane. For those who don't know, Mike is an avid Pittsburgh Pirates fan. He loves the sport of baseball, and he actually did a major league game with Bob Costas. He did a Pirates game with the Cubs, I believe. Is that correct, Mike?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
One of the great, yes. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if you could tell us how that came to be and what you thought about your one game that you did.
HBO Sports did a profile of my wife and myself and our creatures, and followed me around a little bit. And Andrea Kramer did a wonderful job. But there is a part of their show where they always, where Bryant Gumbel always winds up talking to the reporter alone at the end. And he just asked her a throwaway question saying, do you think there's anything else that he wants to do? And she said, well, he's a big Pittsburgh Pirates fan. I'll bet he'd like to do a Pirates game on television because he's never done baseball. And so the next day I'm sitting at a Tim Hortons, which for those of you who don't have them around you, it's like a Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks. Anyway, and my phone rings, and it's a 314 area code. And that's the St. Louis area. I don't really know anyone there, but I decided, okay, I'll take potluck. I'll see who this is. Turns out it's Bob Costas. He said, Mike, I just saw the HBO special last night. It was really terrific. I think I can take care of that bucket list thing for you about doing a Pirates game. I said, oh, well, this is interesting. How do we do that? He said, I do MLB games every Friday night. We'll pick out one on the schedule that's in Pittsburgh. I'll make sure that I get all the business out of the way the first couple of innings, and you can take over and do it as long as you want. You're on. And I said, wow, what a gift that is. So as soon as the hockey season was over, I started studying the Chicago Cubs and the Pittsburgh Pirates like no tomorrow. And so he was good to his word. And I got 3 innings in, 4, 5, and 6. And at the end of the 5th inning, I turned to him and said, how about you take over at the end of the 6th? I thought I had enough prepared. Not even close. You get a lot of chance to use your stories in baseball. As it turned out, they played 19 times that year. The Pirates only beat the Cubs 4 times, but one of the 4 was the night that I was there, and Bob waived all impartiality criteria for the night. I could cheer for my team, so he allowed me to do that. And I don't think anyone can give another announcer a greater gift than he gave me, because I got a lifetime memory courtesy of him, and I will not forget that. I think about it often. I have a picture of the 2 of us with the Pittsburgh Stadium in the background, and it brings a smile. It always does.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the first major league game you saw was at Wrigley Field with the Cubs and Pirates, was it not?
Yeah. That really crystallized myself as a fan. I'd listened on radio for years to Bob Prince do the games on KDKA 50,000 watts, but that day, a Sunday afternoon, August 9th in 1959, I saw my team play live, and they came from behind and won a game against the Cubs in 10 innings. And I had seen Roberto Clemente live. I'd seen him only on the radio and occasionally on television. I saw him play live, and Bill Mazeroski and all those great Pirates. And so it was it was another one of those great memories that I'm privileged to have had in my life.
Well, I'm going to jump back now to the hockey rink. I wanted to talk to you about a game you did for ESPN. Bill Clement was your analyst, and it's one everyone remembers, at least those who were watching, because of what happened during the game. It was one of the longest games in NHL history, and you could take it from there.
Well, it was the 7th game of the first round of the playoffs between the Islanders and Washington Capitals at Capitol Center in Landover, and it all started normally. I mean, a 7th game is special. I got to do 46 of them in my career, and this would have been one of the very first that I ever got to do in 1987. And the game wound up tied at the end. Kelly Hrudey and Bob Mason were the 2 goaltenders, and they were Hrudey was on the way to setting a record that only recently was eclipsed for saves in a game, and it went into not only 1 overtime but 2. And as this is the night before Easter Sunday in 1987, and it's and all right, we're starting to get a little giddy, and the players I've talked to later, and Kevin helped document this for me in the book, were saying as each overtime started, we knew we had a couple of good offensive shifts in us. And if we didn't score then, the rest of the period of overtime, we were probably protecting more than we were being offensive. So we realized too that the chances of a game ending were better early than they were late, which meant too that we were starting to drift a little bit in our thought pattern as there were more delays and more face-offs and more pucks held to the boards and more whistles, because the officials were being sympathetic to the players and giving them as many stoppages as they could. Bill was doing some male modeling at the time, and he was carved out a lot differently than I was. And he started talking about maybe doing something unusual during the next intermission if it went that far. And so between intermissions 2 and 3, I went to the washroom and then came back and discovered that he had forecast that we would be going without our shirts on, and he had taken his dress shirt off. He was in a t-shirt. I had undone my dress shirt at the collar. That was about as far as I was going to go. He had tied his tie around his head because he did a number of imitations, John Wayne, and he was acting the role of Cochise. And so I just spun him into a number of his impersonations, and we tried to do some light entertainment during that intermission. Okay, so that, as it turned out, the players were telling jokes down in the dressing room. They were trying to cut some of the tension as well. And then went the 3rd overtime period. At one point during the 3rd overtime period, Bill said that he was going to go further if this went to another intermission before a 4th. For him, that meant taking the t-shirt off too. Well, he could do it because he was cut a lot differently than I was. I wasn't probably going to go a lot further, but anyhow, it goes to the end of the 3rd overtime. And before I left again for another trip to the washroom, because I'm constantly having coffee at that time, we have already counted down midnight and Happy Easter to everybody. And when I came back, Bill had his shirt back on, his tie was done up, his jacket was back on. And I said to him, we got a phone call, didn't we? And he didn't say a word. He just smiled and nodded yes. There was some searching done by one of the columnists for Kevin's newspaper. He was not involved in the search, trying to find someone in ESPN that didn't particularly like our little intermission parody of Boomer Jeffrey and John Wayne. And sure enough, they found somebody there that hammered us pretty good in the paper. And we did receive bottles of champagne from the president of ESPN 2 days later. And a note was attached that said, I understand decorum, nevertheless, And I still have the unopened bottle of champagne. Not a big fan of champagne, but I thought for the sake of a souvenir, I should probably save it. And in the fourth overtime, Pat LaFontaine wheeled, fired a shot that glanced off the post and in, and the Islanders won the game. And the crowd was entirely sober because the concession stands had closed at the end of the second regulation time period. So there was nowhere to get anything, including coffee, after the second period was over.
Yeah, and I can add a little postscript to that.
You were there?
Well, yeah, I was there. My second daughter was born later on after that game. I went back to write the story, and my wife called and said it was time to go to the hospital.
Oh my.
But anyway, I wanted to remind you too, as well, because you had told me this story and I love it. There was a wedding that was going on, and the wedding party all came for the start of the game, went to the wedding, went to the reception, and was able to come back and was there when they scored the overtime goal.
Yep.
That's how long that game went.
Yeah, Islander fans, and at that time tickets were torn, not scanned, and they still had their ticket stubs when they came out of the reception. And the reason that we knew about this was that they were Islander fans and they were dressed in tuxedos, and they were down near the Islanders bus after it was all over. All the Capitals fans had gone home in disgust. And so these guys were hanging around the Islanders bus after in tuxedos. Well, that prompted a question. Well, what are you guys doing here? And they told us the story.
The Mike, when we were doing the book and we talked about, your favorite people that you worked with, and I remember chuckling to myself because they were all your favorite people to work with.
Yeah.
But it's pretty clear that you've had a special relationship with some of them, John Davidson, Bill Clement, for sure. But, Eddie Olczyk, your last one, both of you were cancer survivors. You've bonded on so many different levels. Can you talk a little bit about Eddie and your relationship with him?
Yeah, I think that's probably a part of what cemented us was the fact that, we had worked together doing some radio in the early part of the 21st century. And then eventually we were put together on NBC for 14 years. And we wound up laughing a lot. I have some still photographs that were taken one after the other, about 30 seconds apart. And in all of them one of us is not posing very well because he's laughing. We do that a lot. But we also, I think the fact that we value a lot of the same things in life, even though we're entirely different people. I don't bet on horses. He doesn't care about the Pirates, but he cares about the Cubs. We're different in some respects, but alike in others, in that we value family a lot. We value dogs a lot. And we like a lot of the people that are quality people that are in the hockey business. And I think that's, part of the reason that we've gotten along so well. It's hard to work as many games as we have over the years and not like the person that you work with. And I've never had a situation like that. I've been very fortunate. But Eddie is a quality person, a good soul. And I think the one thing too, that we're separated by about 20 years, and he has always looked out for me. I'm not an invalid. I'm not shaky or anything like that, but he has always been on guard to make sure that I got various places. If I was new to a place, he was always on the lookout for somebody that was his senior. And I've seen him be that way with other people. He always has respect for his elders. He has taught all four of his children to be the same way. And until you tell them to stop, those people will call you Mr. Emmerich because that's how they are taught to be. I just have a lot of respect for him. And in particular, I think the one thing I carry away from him was 2 years ago when he had colon cancer and he went through all 12 of the chemotherapy treatments separated by 2 weeks. He made it very public. Everyone has their own decision to make regarding that. But he worked in the second week of each of the treatments because he felt well enough to do it. And he would talk about how he was doing. And by doing so, he planted, I think, the seed of memory in the 1 out of every 3 people or family members who are associated with people that have cancer or will get it. And they will know at least one person who has been through it, who has fought it and won, and who is accessible to talk positively to them about it. And that's why he's such a good friend, because he's a friend to everybody. And part of the reason so many prayers were said for Eddie and so many letters and emails came to him from teams and from anybody in the sport was that he was such a good friend to them. And that's how you get friends, by being one. And he has been one for me. He always said, I'll have your back. And I always said to him, I hope when you get to be my age, first of all, I want you to get to be my age. I hope when you get there that you have somebody that looks out for you like you've looked out for me. He's a great soul. I love Eddie.
Mike, when we were doing the book, if you recall, or maybe you don't, but I pushed you a little bit on trying to define your style, and we really didn't get anywhere on that.
I don't know what I am.
Well, that's the point I was going to make. My eureka moment was when I realized that your style isn't a style because it's just who you are. Like you don't work at it; it just comes naturally to you. But I wonder if you could, for the people watching here, at least, talk about, you had such unique word usages. You always described things differently. There were no cliches. The way that you talked about getting the puck out, the use of the word shuffleboard, that sort of thing. Did you think about that between games? Did it come to you naturally? How did that work for you?
No, it didn't. And I think after a while, I think probably the greatest thing that people helped me with along the way, and Bill Clement was important in this, and Chico Resch to an extent, and Eddie, I think largely too, was to not take myself too seriously, because I used to agonize, and I still do, over misidentifying players, but I used to agonize so much over making mistakes. And my mentor from Fort Wayne days, Bob Chase, used to always say, be yourself. And it took a long time to get there, but here are a couple of examples someone asked me about the other day, and I remembered them. And they were just an example of being myself and taking a chance and getting lucky, because there are times you take a chance and you're unlucky. But for example, Michigan Stadium, the Winter Classic between Detroit and Toronto, the football layout, because the rink is 200 feet long, the football layout is that the rink goes down on the 17-yard line and goes to the other 17-yard line. And Detroit had a player named Henrik Zetterberg who was very good at carrying the puck and was terrific when he got the puck alone and had open ice. So I got lucky and I took a chance. So I'm sitting down next to the glass because they tried it that day for the first time and it worked, they felt. And so they kept trying it every year at the Winter Classic, putting us right next to the ice. So I see Henrik pick up the puck at the center red line. It's the 50-yard line. And I said, it's Zetterberg at the 50. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. And it worked because nobody defended him. He kept going. And it was one of those lucky moments that I had where it was just me taking a chance and having fun. There was another case that Eddie actually chuckled out loud. And you walk away saying, oh, that was fun to try. And it probably wouldn't work 9 times out of 10, but tonight it did. Washington is playing at Madison Square Garden against the Rangers in a February game. And Washington has a player named Jay Beagle. And the Rangers have a player named Shepard. And the puck went in the corner and those two guys went in after it. And I said, Beagle and Shepard are in the corner battling at the same place where the Westminster Kennel Club show was last week. You just get, once in a while, you get lucky. And those are the only two players that were going after the puck. And Eddie laughed out loud and had something to say about dogs. I don't know what it was, but those are times when finally, I probably wouldn't have done that in the early ESPN days or 20 years earlier, but you relax a little more as you get older and you realize what can they do to you.
Yeah. Mike, those weren't in the book, so now we know what we're going to add for the second edition.
I didn't think of them earlier. Just have, yeah, very good.
Good. We need to start piling up. When we were talking about your retirement, and I'm paraphrasing, you didn't use these words, but essentially you told me that one of the reasons why you felt it was the right time to retire is that you owed your bride Joyce some days for being home alone all this year. Can you sort of talk about that and what she's meant to you and your career?
Well, we met when I was doing these guys, and it was in 1974. She was a resident of Port Huron, Michigan, and we got very clear in the very early days of our dating that she was going to always stay here. And I knew that the team wasn't going to last very long, and I was going to have a career that I was going to leave. And sure enough, in 1977, I got to leave and go to the Maine Mariners. And she, of course, without any surprise, chose to stay back because I did ask the question after I'd been out in Maine about 3 months. And she said, no, this is where I want to be. And then the Maine Mariners' first preseason game was, ta-da, in Port Huron, Michigan. And all of a sudden, we saw one another again. And then after Christmas time, we realized that neither of us were getting along too well without one another. And so we got engaged in Easter and then got married that summer and moved out to Maine. And she took up the life at first, of a hockey widow. And then after about a year and a half, I got a chance to move into Philadelphia. And she went to work with the Flyers in the ticket office. Now, if you can imagine someone with one window in the box office, and she was the one that was at the window dealing with all of the ticket problems during a game. So she was a very strong person, but a very polite person. And I said, how do you do that? She said, you just let them blow off steam first, and then you try to solve their problem. And usually they're happy when they leave. It's just they've got to yell first and go crazy first. Well, she had a family back in Port Huron, and her stepfather had a heart attack. And so she came back to tend to not only that, but also her mother, who was having dementia problems. And so she retired from that in 1993. So the last, what would it be? My math, 28 years that I was working, she was largely alone when I was on the road doing games. And we moved back here 25 years ago. And so all the time, except if I had a game in Detroit, I was always somewhere else. And the commitment that she had, knowing that my love was not only for her, but also for the sport that I followed and my job, the patience that she had and the commitment that she had to just keep getting the suitcase ready, saying the good things, never complaining, needed a reward. And it has had some. She made some trips with me, but by and large, it needed a greater reward. And I was really prepared to give it after 40 years of doing games on television. We both had our health. And I realized that, especially out of the pandemic, that this was a time to do other things and to enjoy other things. And NBC gave me the right to do some video essays so I can still keep my hand in a little bit, but not entirely. That's a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, that was perfect, Mike, as always. But what's the most games you've ever done in a season?
152.
Wow.
In 2005, 2006, we had just come out of the NHLPA problem with the owners, and so Versus Television and NBC and the New Jersey Devils and the Olympics all occurred in one year. And we finished the year with a lot of 7-game series in the playoffs, including the Stanley Cup final between Carolina and Edmonton. And Carolina won it 3-1, an empty netter from Justin Williams in Game 7 in Raleigh. And John Davidson and I walked out of the building that night into the parking lot. And because he's about a foot taller, he spotted our car. that got us out of there because no one was leaving. They were all staying inside to celebrate. And John figured up that year, counting the Olympics and his games with the Rangers, and me counting the Olympics and my games that I had done with the Devils, he did 153 games, and I had done 152. Never came close to that number again. But after you've done that many games, you realize, what am I trying to prove? But I did love the notion of doing games. But when you do 8 games in 10 nights in 8 different cities, you realize that as you look in the mirror at yourself, that 8th game is probably not as good as the first one, because you're traveling in the morning to make morning practices, and it can't be. But you realize too that you really love doing it, but still the audience probably suffers on that 8th game because you're tired at that point and you can't bring the accuracy that you could in the first one.
When we were doing this book, we talked about your retirement, but you weren't sure exactly when you were going to do it. But you talked about the last elevator ride, and I said to you, that's how we have to end the book. And the last elevator ride, of course, would be up to the press box, and for that final game where you could at least sort of relish that final game. But that's not how it happened. Your final game, were you disappointed? What was your reaction to the fact that you called your last NHL games from your basement?
Yeah, it was up 2 flights of stairs to the main level, and no line at the refrigerator and no line at the bathroom in intermissions. No, I had, and just so that it's the last chapter of the book, as Kevin mentioned, and I just thought it would end like any other year, where either the Stanley Cup would be handed out in dead silence because the home team lost, or in thundering ovations that would last all night long because the home team won. And then I would take that last elevator ride down and my career would be over. As it turned out, it did not work out that way because of the pause. And it looked as though we were not even going to finish a season for a while. We were just going to call it quits and try to start again the next October. And had that been the case, I don't know if I would have tried another season or not. But when NBC allowed me to work from home, and they did the technology necessary to take off the delay of over a second that would normally occur if you were viewing a game on a monitor and the audio that you would supply to it, they took that down to 1/12 of a second from well over a second, so that it was negligible. They went to bat for me big time and enabled me to do that kind of work. So it was in a way disappointing that the last elevator ride did not happen the way I predicted. But there was one last elevator ride that is documented in the book, and that was the one that Eddie and I took the last game before the pause, San Jose and Chicago, in Chicago on the 11th of March, and the pause occurred the next day. And then Kevin and I finished the book on the last day of March. We had a little doctoring to do, largely because of me, in April. And we were still waiting to see what on earth was going to happen in hockey through May and June and July. And then finally they put things together in August and September. We had playoffs. And so everything turned out to be a surprise with bubbles and 33,000 out of 33,000 perfect COVID tests. Everything turned out wonderfully. But the final chapter of my book was not accurate at all.
Well, I think your fans will forgive you for that, given the circumstances. But we want to open up for questions. But before I do, I got to ask you, because I know everyone's thinking this: is there any chance you'll ever broadcast another game?
No, I had my time and I loved it, but it's that's a lot of years, and it entails getting in aircrafts, staying in hotels, and all of those things that I did grow weary of doing. And it was what was appealing to me at the start. Gee, I rode buses for 7 years. Now I get to ride on an airplane. I get to stay in a Marriott. instead of a Motel 6 or whatever it is, I get to be in big hotels, and that was thrilling for a lot of years. But near the end, those are the things that get tiring. And I think too, the one thing that the pandemic took away from me, and perhaps from you too, and anyone who reports, is that contact that we had with players and coaches that was personal. It was all on computers instead of personal, where you could learn something that you could share. And I missed that a lot last summer. And I understand that it's still not back yet.
No. But we're ready for questions now, if people have them.
Yeah, wow, thanks guys. That was that was so great. Thank you both for doing that. We do have a bunch of questions. We will do our best to get to all of them, but we're running out of time. So let's start with from Matt. I've seen your notebook with all of your handwritten entries. What sort of details do you put in there, and have you ever lost it?
Yeah, no, I've been lucky. It's never disappeared. The notebook he's talking about, for example, this is the last game that I did. This would be Dallas in green, and it's numerical in order from 2 all the way up through 91, Tyler Seguin, all the way back to Jamie Alexiak. And then on this side, it would be Tampa Bay there in blue. And this is spiral bound, so it will lay down flat. And then I put my scorecard over the top of it. So what is on that would be heights, weights, birthplaces, number of years in the league, little things like that I could just glance down if play had stopped. Because you really don't have time to glance down while play is underway, but you do have time when it stopped. And then on the opposite side of Tampa's, I have some actual printed biographical notes on their players by number. If I needed 5 seconds to throw something in about one of their guys, like Carter Verhaeghe, who is not with them anymore, it would be scoring champ in the American Hockey League in 18-19. So he's the reigning scoring champ from the minor leagues coming in to last year. And I have the same thing on the opposite side. I just flip it over for Dallas. So that's a system that I developed over the years. And the kinds of things that are on there pertain to simple things that I could grab quickly about how many years a player was at a certain team, and also his draft year, what year it was and what round he was picked. So easy things.
I'm assuming since you wrote the pronunciation guide, you don't have to include pronunciations in there, correct?
Once in a while I do, because these guys will change their pronunciations. And when they do that, they really can mess you up because you learned it one way. Brad Marchand became Marchand and then became Marchand again. And we actually had to collar Brad the year that Boston went to the Stanley Cup final and say, and I had my trusty phone here and it was in record. And I said, we need to get this right. You can play games all you want, but and have people saying it different ways, but it's important we get the names right. And he was very good about being serious about it and not playing games with us. But you oftentimes, when you've learned it a certain way, in the haste of a game, it'll come out the wrong way because you learned it that way and it's been changed. Teemu Selanne, one of the longtime great players that's in the Hall of Fame, came over, and that was how it was said for 1 year. And then the Winnipeg Jets, where he was, convinced him that everybody was saying Selanne, so why didn't he fold? And he did. And many of the European players will just say, I don't care how you say it. Well, that doesn't help us, but that's how they feel.
We've got one here from Eric who asks, have you ever seen a crazier playoff series than the Rangers Bruins in 1972? Dead chickens thrown at Sanderson, Pi McKenzie hitting everything in sight, and Oren Esposito dominating. The gag line was effective, but the big bad Bruins pitchforked the blue shirts into the following season.
That's pretty good. That would not be someone who has just graduated high school that would ask a question like that. It was one of the greats. And in terms of some of those years, one of the flaws that I think that modern day television has that we've tried, and NBC has been very open about allowing me to do that, is to show some of the players from those years, because a new generation has come in. And I think, Kevin, you've probably found this out too. The new generation of fans have come in, and they didn't see Mike Bossy play, let alone Bobby Orr ever play, or ever see him play in video. And so to show, and NBC allowed me to do a scrapbook of 10 seconds apiece on one legendary player from each of the two teams playing that night, just so fans could see what kind of a shot Mike Bossy had. I mean, it was marvelous. And, you know, the greats like Gretzky and all of that, but Mike Bossy was a great too. And his video didn't get shown very often. And so this new generation of fans has come in, and they haven't had a chance to see some of the greats of the past who were really, really great too. You can respond to that, Kevin, because you go back just about as far.
Yeah, I do. The only thing I would add is when you bring up Mike Bossy, my first interview as the USA Today's national hockey writer was with Mike Bossy. That's why I remember starting my career going to Long Island, and it was such a thrill to do that. I had covered the NHL before, but it's a different perspective when you're a national writer, as you know, as a national broadcaster compared to a local broadcaster.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
Mike, got an interesting one here. Yeah, from Dave. Have you ever played an instrument, or has music been a part of your life? I ask because your timing is impeccable, and in my mind, you kind of sing a game, as you call it.
Oh my, that's an interesting thing. My dad ran a music store, and that first game that I saw in Fort Wayne in December 1960, he actually took the entire staff of the music store to the game. So it not only accomplished getting me off his back, but he called that the Christmas party. And so I did play clarinet and I did play piano back in those days. The clarinet is still in its case and hasn't been touched, unfortunately, in 20 years. The piano is just in this next room, and I wish I could say I'd touched it more than once in the last 5 years. I think I could probably take lessons and get my dexterity back and play a little bit, but not for you tonight.
Well, Dave's question is appropriate because Dave is the lead singer of the Connecticut-based all hockey rock band, the Zambonis. So I think that's
very good. All right.
All right, Elizabeth asks, what's your favorite building to call a game in and why?
There's a two-way tie because of the location of the press box. Montreal's Bell Center and the new Little Caesars Arena in Detroit. And here's why. You are high and you are close. And so my job is to identify players, and that gives me the best chance under the brightest lights to identify players. And the Bell Center is brightly lighted, and you're probably anywhere from 20 rows back and closer is close, I define it as. And at Little Caesars Arena, the new press box, you're 90 feet up, which is way up there. But you're only 16 rows back. And so you can see all four corners, and you, under those bright lights, the white against the red of the Red Wings jerseys, those numbers stand out really well. And so those are my two favorite ones.
I'm gonna add, I know we're at 8, so just a couple more questions.
We're good as far as you guys are, and
okay.
As long as Kevin is.
Oh, I'm great. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, so this one I'm going to ask for both of you. What was the scariest brawl you've ever seen on the ice?
I'll go first, and then we'll let Mike think about it. I saw Link Getz fight Bob Probert, and
wow.
I thought it was the scariest thing I'd ever seen. And Link Getz was one of the scariest fighters I've ever seen. Bob Probert was an interesting fighter because I don't think he loved fighting. Once it would take him a minute or so to get into it, and then once he'd been hit a few times, then he was, among the greatest fighters ever. But he didn't have malice for his opponent. Link Getz always seemed to me to have malice for the guys he fought, and I thought that was scary. They were just throwing punches as if they were trying to drive them through the other player. So I would say that would be the scariest. And then in terms of brawls, the last one I saw what was it? Maybe, Mike, it might have been the last that we saw was the Montreal-Philadelphia one in the playoffs. When that had the potential to get ugly, they did manage to keep it under control, but that was before the game that got in. Mike saw a lot of those in the minor leagues.
Yeah, those would happen sometimes, but yeah, there's probably 15 individual stories that came out of the pregame brawl between Montreal and Philadelphia. Anyone you talk to has a story that about it and what triggered it. And I'll give you, I hope, a 45-second thumbnail. It had evolved into a Claude Lemieux of Montreal going out onto the ice after the warm-up was over and shooting the puck into Philadelphia's net. Well, there was no way of defending that unless you defended it from your own dressing room and went out too. And it had evolved through the earlier games of the series. And then Chico Resch, this very peaceful goaltender, would turn the net around and push it against the boards so that Claude would not be able to shoot the puck down the ice at the end of the warm-up into the net. So in this pregame schmozzle in Montreal, Chico pushed the net against the boards and he left. And that left the ice empty. And then I'm sitting up in the press box, and Kevin, maybe you're there too. And you see the Montreal door, the locker room door, crack just a peep. And here comes Claude. And he's got Shane Corson running shotgun with him. And he's coming back through the walkway. And he gets onto the ice and he's going down and he's going to move the net so he can stuff a puck into it and achieve what he wanted to do. And so off the other side, here comes Ed Hospodar, one of the meaner Philadelphia Flyers, with this peace-loving Chico Resch. And he moves in and attacks Claude Lemieux before he can get there. And of course, all the Canadians hear that this is going on. They come streaming out of their locker room. All of the Flyers, except for Ron Hextall, who was being held physically in the Philadelphia locker room because he's the goaltender who is inclined to fight anyway. He's being held there by his coach, Mike Keenan. They're all out on the ice. Some are in flip-flops and not in their skates yet because they have gotten relaxed from after the warm-up. And it's a melee that lasts a long time. It's just great. I'm sorry. It was a time when chaos was somewhat fun. No one got seriously hurt other than Don Knockbauer got his nose broken by Larry Robinson, and he was in the Philadelphia dressing room sort of crying to himself, saying, "My idol broke my nose. My idol broke my nose."
We've got from Tim and Matt. They both ask, "What's the biggest change that you've seen in hockey since you got your start in the game?"
The large number of teams and the large number of nations represented. We had 20 countries that came back after the 4.5-month pause. US, Canada, and 18 other. And players came back from all of those countries and reoriented themselves. If they needed to get in condition, they did. And we had a tournament that involved 24 teams. It was phenomenal. But I'd say that's the greatest thing, because when I started in 1973 with Bill Watt, it was rare to have a player from the United States like Bill was playing on any professional team, because it was mostly Canadians. And college guys like Bill from Michigan State, college guys were oftentimes sneered at or blamed because they were viewed by some scouts in some organizations as not being worthy of being professionals. But that all changed. And then eventually we had players starting to come over from Sweden, and eventually from Russia, and eventually from behind the Iron Curtain in Czechoslovakia, it was known then, and then later was called the Czech Republic or Slovakia. So I think that's the biggest thing, is the nations have changed. And as a result, the game has changed too. Bigger, stronger, faster, all of those cliches you hear, they're true.
So for Michael, he says, "First, thank you for all that you've done for hockey, and congratulations on your well-deserved retirement." He says,
thank you.
And his question is, do you have a favorite hockey team? It's okay, you can say it now.
There it is. They're still my boys. I got to see them play once last year, the Fort Wayne Comets. The logo has changed now, but they're coming up on their 70th anniversary, 75th anniversary, I think it is, very soon. No, it's the 70th anniversary next year. And I was there to see them on their 8th anniversary. So that's how long ago it was. They're still my favorite team. And they're the one team that I've openly cheered for all those years. The Hershey Bears to an extent, because I lived in Hershey for a while. But the Fort Wayne Comets, they're it. No NHL team. I never allowed myself to have that, and so I still don't. But I sure cheer for individuals, and I cheer for individual players and coaches, but not for a team per se.
You still do the Hall of Fame for the Bears?
I used to, yeah. John Walton is so much at hand. He's very close. He's only 2 hours away in Washington. And I was missing several times from that because it was difficult logistically to get from out here in Detroit back to Hershey at the time they wanted. In December, I would have games that would conflict. And John is so loved in Hershey because he came from there. He broadcast their games that it was just a natural for him to do it on a regular basis. And you can't do anything forever, I have found. And so John is the guy they always count on now, but I do treasure the times that I got to do it.
And I think we'll wrap on Wendy's question. She says, I never knew the English language had so many words to describe how a puck can be passed from player to player. Shove, shuffled, finesse, pitch, pull, jab. I would spend the game waiting to hear what you would come up with next. Mike, ever have to consult a thesaurus during a broadcast?
No, and none of this was ever planned out. I never wrote anything down that I was going to get in that night. It's just the way I talk. The dogs don't understand me, but it's the way that I speak. And a lot of it is just the volume of games that I did. There are always things that you add as the seasons go on that you experiment with. That sounds like, and that looks like that action that I described. And so you keep it in. And the one thing, Wendy, that you do is you try not to overuse it. And I would sort of mentally eliminate it after I used it once in a game. Sometimes it would reappear, but most times I tried to only use one of those once in the course of a game. But I appreciate your asking. Nothing was ever pre-planned, but they were some words that I would use just for variety's sake and sometimes to amuse myself.
Well, as we wrap up, I want to first thank Bill Watt so much for his introduction, for agreeing to do this. Bill, thank you so much. It was awesome. We appreciate it. And it was very cool to meet you. So thank you, sir. And to Kevin and Mike, what an honor to have you both here. Thank you for this. Congratulations on the book too, because I know you released the book in the middle of a pandemic, so I'm sure it's been a weird year, but the book is fantastic. And folks, if you want a copy of it, of Off Mic, the link is in the chat, and they are book plate signed copies. So please click that link, buy the book. Mike and Kevin, thank you again, and to everybody watching, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for always coming out to our things. Check westportlibrary.org for more. And good night, everybody. Be well and stay safe. Good night.
Amen to that. Thank you.